Right now, I would like to introduce Professor John Ungerleider, who's been teaching about conflict transformation at SIT in Vermont for more than 20 years. He has authored articles that address youth, peacebuilding, dialogue and empowerment programs, music and peace culture, and he edited a book on child labor. John started the youth peacebuilding and leadership programs at SIT in 1990, beginning with the Vermont Governor's Institute of International Affairs, which brought Soviet and Vermont teams together. This evolved into the Institute on Current Issues and Youth Activism, which over the years has brought together future leaders for such troubled spots in the world as Cyprus, Northern Ireland, the Middle East, Iraq, Rwanda, and Serbia to dialogue about their conflicts. John has lived, taught, and facilitated conflict resolution in Venezuela, Cyprus, Israel, and Spain. John founded the Child Labor Education and Action Project, or CLA, which enables Vermont teens to learn about and take action to address the global issue of oppressive child labor. CLA participants recently wrote and lobbied for state legislation creating a Vermont government sweat-free purchasing policy, and it passed. I also understand that Professor Ungerleider plays bass and sings in an SIT own rock and roll band. And that he can be fanatic about skiing, tennis, eating, or cooking international food. So without further ado.
Okay. Okay, merci beaucoup. And en anglais ou français? And then thank you also to Greg Orefici, who used to be a colleague of mine over at SIT, who invited me over here today. And I must say, at SIT, it's called the School for International Training. Now it's just the SIT, Graduate Institute, or Study Abroad. Anyone done any study abroad in this group? You guys do it through the center here? Yeah, or you're going to do it? You're all going to do it? Wonderful. So SIT does a lot of study abroad programs, but what I do at SIT, I'm a professor of peacebuilding and conflict transformation, and I also run youth programs. We call them peacebuilding and leadership programs for kids from around the world, especially countries where there's conflicts. We had a lot of kids from Iraq this summer, a lot of kids from Mexico, from Burma, from Libya. I was working with kids from Libya just a couple weeks ago, Egypt, Tunisia, so places where there's really been a lot of conflict, and how can we help them deal with these either conflict between groups, identity-based conflict, or just the problems that come from there being war in these countries. But in my school, we don't usually sit in big lecture halls, so I'm not used to that. If there were fewer of you, I'd make you all come down here and stand in a circle. But I can still ask you to do a few things, because I do work with teenagers all summer, and teenagers won't sit still, and other people don't like to. So I'm going to ask you to see if to wake you up a little bit after lunch and make sure. I'm going to ask you to do a few things, if you'd be willing. So if you could stand up and stand close enough to somebody so you can reach their hands, so you have to scoot in a little on the end. And then this will be a little bit of a challenge. So this is what you're going to do. It's going to be easy for the people on the ends. Too easy, but there's nothing we can do. So you're going to raise your left hand, and then drop it down flat like this. And you're going to raise your right finger and put it in the hand of the person next to you, in the palm. And if this, for any religious reason, it's not okay, or you're women next to men, if you need to move, you can do that. But this is what you have to do. If I say peace building or conflict transformation, you have to grab the finger of the person, and at the same time, that person has to try to escape. So you see the people on the ends, it's a little easy for them. But there's nothing we can do. So as I said, I'm a professor of peacebuilding which is a form, and then put it back down, and none of this, creeping up with the fingers, flat. Yeah, I see that. I know in New Hampshire people do that. So that's a form of also conflict transformation. Okay? And you might say, so what is he talking about transforming? Maybe you've heard of, and this might trick you, maybe you've heard of conflict resolution, which is different. But when you sit down, we'll think about, why do we call it conflict resolution instead of conflict transformation? So, I know, so think about that for a minute. And at least for my answer, I'll say, well, first of all, how many of these conflicts have we resolved over the years? But we're also, I think a resolution implies like it's done. But conflicts aren't just done. They don't just go away. We hope to find a way to work with them where we can deal with them peacefully, creatively. It's close. And not violently, especially. So what we're trying to transform are the relationships, the systems, the things that keep these conflicts in place. And that's why we call it conflict transformation. Very good. But also there's something that's developed that's even, I think, more creative and positive in a sense, and it's actually now more widely known as a term, which is peacebuilding. Okay, you can sit down. Okay, I'll see you. So I thought what I want to do in the time together is give you a little sense of how this works out in the world in terms of analyzing problems and patterns, and then thinking about approaches, interventions. But I also want to get you to do a few exercises that'll make it practical to you. So you're not just going to be digesting my models and what I have to say, but wrestle with them a little bit. So we'll do some things with partners and people sitting around you to think about the, let's see, does this have one of those pointy things? Let's see if no, it doesn't have a light. Oh, maybe it does, haha. Okay, so first one, so this idea, if we think about the two parts of conflict transformation, analysis and intervention. You don't want to just go out there and do something if you don't have some analysis of the situation and can jump into it. So I want to, and the class I was teaching this morning, I came over at, was called Conflict and Identity. So many of the conflicts in the world today are based on people's deep identities, group identities. When I started teaching, it was still the very end of the Cold War. I won't tell you when that was. But my first class I ever taught on conflict was the year the Berlin Wall fell. Actually, it was about a month into my class, and the Berlin Wall came down. And my class was about the conflict with the Soviet Union and the United States. So there went my whole class. But since then, what we've seen around the world are all these identity conflicts that have become so many forms of them. I mean, and they might not just be between countries or between religions, but within religions, within countries, within ethnic groups, so many that you've never even heard of them. So many people who want their own country, their own identity, their own autonomy, and just some self-determination and respect. So this is really what's bubbled up after the Cold War, and we've started working on that more. And then we try to think holistically, systematically about how to respond, because there are development issues, if there's poverty, there are all these structural issues that make it worse. So we don't just have to go in and say, okay, let's be friends and shake hands. We have to deal with these systems. And the attitudes, and that's why I put up here that it's a lot of these conflicts are irrational. We say, well, let's just agree on something. But no, there's deep hatreds, there's stories. And these things are so easily manipulated by leaders. If you look at Syria right now, that started out as a rebellion against the corruption in the government, like it was throughout the Middle East. Egypt, Tunisia, these places were about, it wasn't about the Sunnis and the Shiites but there's that history there. And then the leaders know, okay, I don't want to lose my power. I'm going to start calling names and blaming. And pretty soon, once the bullets fly, everybody gets afraid and they start defending themselves and they remember the stories. In Serbia, you guys might not even remember Yugoslavia when it was one country. Of course you don't, you weren't born. But when that broke up, the Serbian leader Milosevic started saying, remember when we lost the battle to the Turks in 1389? I mean, really? That's a reason to go fight somebody because you lost the battle 600 years ago? But it got people fired up and it started a genocide. So I want to show you some of these, sort of break down these dynamics. And when you make a model, you have to have it all be the same letter, I figure. So I put these, to think, as I said, what are these systems, these relationships, and these different pieces of basically solidifying attitudes people have against each other. So if you think of relationships, I mean, here's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is always in the news. There's always something there. I thought just pictures give a great image of how intense. I mean, you know, this is Abraham. Actually, yesterday at SIT, we brought in a Jewish leader, a Muslim leader, and a Christian leader. And we had a group of Algerians there, and then a group of the students on campus. And we had them talking about interfaith dialogue and that they'd done in the community. Actually, at SIT, I think they did the first Jewish-Muslim prayer service ever in the country, maybe ever anywhere, who knows. But it was a very ambitious thing to do. Not extremely ideological, super religious people, but they made an effort to transform this. But you think you can see these are in a sense brothers. You think Ibrahim, you know the story that it splits. You know, Abraham, whose sons are Abraham? Remember Abraham? He was the patriarch back in the, who first went to the promised land, and God said to him what?
Kill your son.
Kill your son, take your son. And which son did he take up to? Isaac, says who? The Bible. What does Islam say? Which son? Was Ishmael. Was not Isaac. Was the other son. So there's two, but it's the same father. It's the same story, but there's a split there between the brothers. Well, if you read in these old religious documents, there's so much of this, the division between brothers and the conflicts, and whether they reconcile or not, which they sometimes do. But it's that close, these relationships that are so violent and they're so heated. And then that leads to rhetoric. It's stories. A lot of it is stories. And this is anybody know where these are from, these these murals? This is a clue if you know the Easter Rebellion in Dublin. This is Northern Ireland. And that's one of the most colorful places where there's all this story of conflict. They've pretty much worked it out. They've got a government functioning now, but they have these long stories. And they paint these murals all over the country to tell their story and also remind, this is our neighborhood. You better not come in here, or is very threatening. And this is, of course, this is the powerful side in that conflict, the Protestants, and this is the weaker side, the Irish, the Catholics, and the Protestants who are loyal to the crown in England. But all over the country, in the city, they have these murals telling their story and songs and colors and flags. So it's very colorful, these conflicts. Now, I lived and worked in Cyprus, and actually, Rami, your name was? Molly. She actually worked on these programs also years ago. Anybody know why there's a conflict in Cyprus? Anybody heard of Cyprus? Cyprus? We don't usually think, oh, it's Crete, it's part of Greece. Cyprus is in the Mediterranean, and it's split between two groups of people that are loyal to their homelands. Which lands?
Turkey and Cyprus.
Turkey and Greece, yeah. And it's majority Greek, but where do you think, is it closer to Turkey or closer to Greece?
Turkey.
It's way closer to Turkey, and but it's like 80+% Greek. Oops, that's Cyprus too. And So I won't go into the whole long history, but Cyprus was divided in half in 1974 when the Turkish army came in. But how do you think they tell the story about that? What do you think the Greeks call it when the Turkish army came in? Invasion. What do you think the Turkish Cypriots call it? Good guesses. Happy peace operation. It's a really different story, isn't it? Because the Turkish army came and protected them from the Greeks, and the Greeks lost their homes. And everybody moved to two sides of the island, and there's barbed wire in the middle of the island. And when I started working with the groups from Cyprus, you couldn't cross. They'd never met somebody from the other side. And they thought people had horns on their head. They'd come, they were afraid, because they'd come here, and we'd put them in the dorm room together. And they're like, and they'd be scared. But after a week, they love each other. I mean, it's possible to change these perceptions when we get over the stereotypes. Now, one of the things that are left from all these conflicts are maps. Well, here's Cyprus down here. See, it's cut in half. And now, if you look at the map, the Turkish side names all their side in Turkish. The Greek side names all the towns on their side in Greek. And then here in the Middle East, you see Israel and Palestine. So here, this is how the Palestinians see it. Oh, look how we've lost our land. We used to have all this land, and then the United Nations in 1948 said, let's divide it up, Jews and Arabs. But they didn't agree on it, and they fought a war, and the Jews took more. They won the war. And then it's left like that. And this is kind of how it's left. And the Palestinians feel like, look at all this land we lost. We only have a little bit left. And there's Jewish settlements everywhere. But the Israelis feel like, wait a minute, look, we're this little tiny country, and we're surrounded by all these Arab Muslim countries. So both sides say we're the victim, we're weak, and the other side's the aggressive. That goes back to that first slide where I said mirror images. I'm always the victim, right? You're always the aggressor, I think. New Hampshire's. You know, Vermont and New Hampshire is kind of like a mirror of the border. I don't know what you guys think of Vermont, but anyway. But then over years, look, these places get really mixed up in the cultural heritage. Any architecture students in here? Can anybody tell me what's funny about that building? Yeah, I got some architecture students here in the front. So they said they're minarets. What's a minaret? It's on a mosque, yeah. But actually, you can tell this is actually a Frankish cathedral. They're actually I don't know, maybe like in Languedoc they have cathedrals like this. It was built by the French Crusaders. But then when the Ottomans took over in the 1500s, they put the minarets, and now it's a mosque because it's on the north side. So there are all these symbols, too, that are important. Do you guys have any important symbols here at UNH, or what's your mascot? Wildcat. That's appropriate for New England, yeah. And the wildcat. And I don't know if you have much connection to the New Hampshire flag or not. State flags don't have much power, I don't think. But you can see there are all these. And look, in Cyprus, look at all the flags. This is kind of a crazy place. We saw the Greek flag. There's the Greek flag. There's the Turkish flag. There's the flag of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. And there's the flag of the Greek side of Cyprus. So there are 4 flags. But look, they tried to fix it. This is when it first became independent in 1960. See, look, what are the colors of the two? And this is getting us to think about how do we transform these relationships. What are the colors of Greece and Turkey? Red and blue. So when they tried to come together and have one country, which failed and broke apart after it was a British colony, what colors did they use there? Not red and blue. They used green and orange. And that was actually, even though it's the flag of the Greek Cypriots, it was designed by a Turkish Cypriot. It's kind of ironic. And then you see all the Irish flag, and then the flag of Northern Ireland, the Ulster flag, so the Israeli and Palestinian flags. So, and then there are a lot of these, posters and murals, as I said. I mean, here Here you can see in Cyprus, here, look, these are these blown up buses. They're just left there from 1974. And it says, remember the Turks are occupying our land. This is the middle of Jerusalem, which is so contested between who controls it, the Jews or the Muslims. And I think this is actually a poster probably for Hamas, about trying to take this back from Israeli occupation. And this is from Bloody Sunday. You know the song U2, Bloody Sunday? That's Bloody Sunday, when the British shot peaceful protesters for civil rights in, I think, 1969, 1970. And that was a priest carrying one of the victims at that time. So when you listen to that song, that's what it's about. Also, what's left in these countries is all this militarization. There's all the landmines and military. And I guess I have to say this because Greg's a tennis player. This is a Greek resistance fighter against the British. But when the British soldiers are there between the Greek and Turkish, keeping the peace, and the British soldiers would like to sneak and put a tennis racket in his hand, and it would really make the Greeks mad, but they couldn't resist. And now, of course, this is a big one. Walls. Is it better to try to live together and fight sometime, or just put a wall between us, and I don't see you and you don't see me? And of course, that's what's happening in Israel. Because of the suicide bombings, they put up security. They call it a security fence. Palestinians call it a wall. And they just don't see each other. It's stable, but is that peace? Is that positive peace? Is it negative peace? We might say it's negative peace, in a sense. Just sort of peace like a military-imposed peace, instead of a sort of healthy, vibrant kind of peace. And then I say the rituals are in place. And by rituals, I mean even like protests. Or look at this, look at the symbols of that from Hamas about teaching this little kid to be a suicide bomber. Or this was a great image that came from when the Palestinians first rebelled against Israel in what's called the Intifada in late 1980s. I mean, that's their flag with a, slingshot. I mean, what does that say to you? What does that say to you? Why don't you guys, for a second, turn to a neighbor and just for a minute, just say, kind of analyze his image. What do they say to you? What does that mean? What are they trying to say by each of those images? Just take like 30 seconds each, just the person next to you, and just try to analyze it a little bit. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, what are a few? Somebody say what your partner said that you thought was interesting. Not what you said, but what your partner said, yeah.
One of my partners said that the map of Cyprus up there looks like it's bleeding into the other side.
Absolutely. Dripping blood from the occupation.
The slingshot reminding me that of David and Goliath.
Yeah, it's really a brilliant poster. And they were then taking back that, that we're David and they're Goliath. Absolutely, it says it all right there. Any other? Okay, yeah.
The guy surrounding the kid with a pole bomb vest is kind of showing like we're not going to stop. Like the new generation's coming up, and they're going to fight just as hard as we are.
Yeah, and think about how deep that is for identity. In terms of the pride and your elders and teaching and what you have to do. And think about maybe in our culture what we have to do as men, or maybe play football or be in the army, or what does it do about who I am and if I'm a good person and what I do. So we think, we're always thinking, oh, there's bad terrorists and people out there, but how were they raised to think that was something good that they should do? It's very complicated. There's ritual demonstrations. And they'll do it, this is in Cyprus, both sides, kids will get out of school and they'll put them in buses and take them all downtown to do a demonstration on various days. And you can see they're walking along the barbed wire there between the two sides. There's just some more of those messages that come from the posters. And then I put this too as religion. Religion's a lot of the students in my class today, I asked them, what conflict are you interested in? A lot of them said religious conflict. It's a big one in the world today, and it's complicated. I personally think it masks other conflicts, that they're not really about worship and about religion, but about group identity and ethnicity. And people don't usually argue about, oh, you should pray this way or that way, but it's my group, which is named by my religion. Like the Catholics and Protestants, they don't argue about how you pray, but everybody knows the Catholics are connected to Ireland and the Protestants are connected to England. But then they can make stories about the other side that slight them and try to bring them down. But in religion, in this case, there's actually this competition over, you can always study this one, in the competition of this place where, here you have this, I think that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but it's very close. You have Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all really within a few 100 meters of each other, the center, some of their most or second or third most sacred places. So, and it's a flashpoint where there can be a time where Palestinians would throw rocks down here, and then the police come in and fight them, and then pretty soon it blows up. But I want to think of other parts of religion, not just formally religion, but sort of as culture. And that in a way, it's not quite sacred, but it's almost. It's really who we are, what we wear. This is the priest there. And sometimes these cultures, one thing I want to say about these conflicts, for the identity conflicts and brothers, often these conflicts are between people that are so similar. You and I could not tell them apart from the outside. Like those first pictures. If they weren't wearing their outfits, you wouldn't know. And in fact, these are from Cyprus. Are they Greek or Turkish? How do you think you can tell? There's only one way you can tell. I'll tell you that. Anybody want to guess? I was told this. I wouldn't know. They're Turkish because they're wearing red sashes. Otherwise, the traditional outfit would be exactly the same. So it's just a little bit of difference. And when we would do a song together, they had the same tune for the same song, and we could sing the words in Greek or in Turkish back and forth. But it was the same tune. And they have the same words for things, and they don't even know it. And we'll challenge them, how many words can you come up in common to see where your common culture is, where it overlaps, instead of just seeing each other as opposites and enemies. I put this as religion because a lot of time martyrs are an important part of, a lot of the Irish posters are the guys who've died or had hunger fasts or been martyrs. And this is in Cyprus. Her son or husband was lost in the war. There were a lot of missing people. But even these things, the way I say they're religion, because in Cyprus there's, I remember them, it's 1,613 missing people. But then one day they found somebody who was on that list. They said, oh, he came, so now is it 1,612? They said, no, it's still 1,613, because they have monuments to that number. And they say, we can replace it with another person. That number is sacred in itself. It doesn't matter, but I found the guy. He's here. No, it's the same number. So it's almost religious. Okay? So I want to challenge you a little bit. If I can get maybe some help handing these out. We'll see if we can get, I really didn't know how many. But this, I'm going to do a little negotiation simulation in partners with the person next to you. And there's green and purple. Oh, the white one does. There's white ones in there. Wait, forget. There's white ones. Just lose those. Those got mixed in there. No, not the white ones. It's not. The green or purple, yeah. So if you could, well, I'll talk a little bit while these are going out. But if you could get a person next to you. So one person has green and one. Don't look at them yet. I'll give you a chance to read them. One person has purple and one person has green. And you could have 2 or 3 people. If it's not even, 2 people could take 1 role. Because in this, so I was talking about conflict. I don't think I can even write big enough. Transformation. But conflict resolution, to try to find a solution is kind of an older field and approach. And this is, and one of the tools in conflict resolution would be negotiation. So you get that. What's negotiation? What's negotiation? Somebody. You've heard of that? How many people have heard of negotiation? Yeah, you've heard. So what is it? Trying to reach, she said, trying to reach a compromise. I said to reach an agreement of some kind. Okay, and who's doing it? 2 sides? Okay, yeah, 2 people. You're like if a business person, you're negotiating a price or something. And then, but I want to give you this word. Do people know what this is? We're not going to do it today, but sometimes people get this confused. What's mediation? Anybody know what that is? A mediator, yeah.
Arbitration.
Well, it's not arbitration, actually. Arbitration, let's go down. We think about, if you're trying to resolve a conflict, right? Well, you might do it by war or violence. Or then you might do, diplomacy. Yeah, we could make a big list here. But even you might do it by legal means, right? Try to, and in this country, what we do, we sue people, right? A lot. But then I just do that because he mentioned arbitration. And that's, we usually hear arbitration when the sports teams are going on strike. And they bring in an arbitrator to decide. But the difference, now, do you want to say something here?
Yeah, is it more like peacefully coming to terms about nonviolent?
Well, these would all be nonviolent. I mean, under here, of legal, I don't know, that might be a little violent. But the arbitrator decides, like a judge, legal. So in mediation, you bring in another person, but they don't decide. They just try to get you to decide, to work between you. So they're neutral. Third party. And they try to get you to decide. So that's the difference. And it's an important difference, because then hopefully you'll really accept it if you've made the decision. But anyway, what we're going to do is a little negotiation simulation now. So everybody have a partner, 1 green, 1 purple. One is Dr. Jones, and one is Dr. Rowland.
We had lots of green up in the back.
A lot of green, but you need to move around so your green is close to a purple. To trade around.
Paper.
So it's okay if you have 3 people or 2 people, but just have 1 or 2 people playing Dr. Jones, what color is Dr. Jones? What doesn't use away? Dr. Jones is green, and Dr. Rowland is purple. Yes, there are more purples. Oh, thank you. There are more purples here. So read those, but I'll tell you what you're going to do. Is Dr. Jones and Dr. Rowland both want to buy 3,000 oogly oranges for very important reasons. Okay, and they're going to negotiate an agreement between them before they go see Dr. Cardozo or Mr. Cardozo. I can't remember his degree. He has the oranges, and so they both want 3,000 oranges. But they know they both want it, so they're going to try to make an agreement about who's going to do what before they approach Mr. Cardozo. Does that make sense? Questions? So what I want you to do is read your role. This is why you want the oranges. And then I'm going to give you time, maybe just 5 minutes, to negotiate between the 2 of you to make an agreement before you buy the oranges. Make sense? Doesn't make sense. Yeah. Okay, go ahead and read that. Let's see. As long as they're reading one, we can move them around. Everybody's got one to read? Okay. You don't have one? Just look over somebody's shoulder. Yeah. Yeah, just spy on whoever's next to you. Just read. Read his. You're going to be tested on this. So.
The black.
Yeah, I figured that out. I couldn't see it either, so. Okay, take about another minute to read, and then I'll tell you when you can start. Let's give people one more minute to read, and then we'll start together. Okay. Is everybody ready? Anybody need more time? A little more time? You ready? Okay, go ahead. Everybody has a partner or two? Okay, so go ahead. I'll give you 5 minutes to make an agreement. See an erase. Merci. What? Okay, 2 more minutes. Doesn't seem like it's been that long. 1 minute. Seulement. Okay, did everybody have an agreement already? Yeah. So we saw you have an agreement. Okay, now I want to know who made an agreement where one person won everything and the other person lost everything. Anybody? No? Nobody gave in? Who made an agreement where you got, so that would be what we call a win-lose relationship. Or if, for math people, zero sum, right? +1 is win, -1 is lose, 0. Who made an agreement where you made 50-50? Okay, like half, 1,500, 1,500. Some people made an agreement, compromise, nice people. Okay. Who made an agreement where everybody got everything they wanted? How is that possible? All right. Stand up and tell them.
Oh, do I have to stand up?
Yeah. If you don't want to, somebody else can go.
So the Jones people needed the juice, and then the Roland people needed the skin. So we sharing.
Did everybody hear that?
Wow.
How could that be? In fact, it seemed like you both wanted all the oranges, but in fact, this was a nice conflict where there was a possible win-win solution. We call a win-win solution where, because one person needed the peel, one person needed the juice. So if you were able to talk it out, you could figure out that you had a need. So then we think, well, what gets in the way of making that, of figuring out that kind of agreement? And there's a couple things I want to think about. One could be the style the way you negotiate it, and we'll come back to that. But first, for identity conflicts, we think about this. What did I draw here with my great art skills? Why I didn't go into art, huh? What is it? Iceberg. You can see it now? The iceberg. It's an iceberg, right? Right? You're right. It should go down farther. Okay. Because what percentage of an iceberg is below the... Something like 90%, right? Below the water. And which part of the iceberg sank the Titanic? Underneath, right? Yeah, it was under. So, because they saw it, I guess, but it gouged underneath. They thought they'd missed it, and I guess if it had hit higher, it wouldn't have sunk it. But okay, so what's beneath the surface can sink. If this is your negotiation up here, you're trying to solve the conflict. There are all these hidden things that can affect. So these are your positions, what you see. 3,000 oranges, So what did we find out that was hidden under the surface here that helped us find it?
You only need a part of the orange.
Right. So actually the needs were kind of hidden, but you could surface them and find out. Now think about what other things might have been affecting this that were under the surface.
Mindset.
Mindset, absolutely. And what was some of the mindset in this one? It was written into the roles a little bit.
My cause instead of your cause.
Yeah, and that's anybody else?
Well, the time was of the essence of the mindset.
Time, so pressure. There was pressure. And what about the relationship between these two guys? Was there any history to it? Huh? You remember you heard in my biography that I played in rock and roll band, so you have to speak up. Huh? They sued each other. So did they trust each other? No. Probably not. So there could be down here mistrust. It seems like you're just trying to make a logical agreement, but there's all these things. Now, what if it's a history of violent conflict between two groups? What else could be down here? What do you think? Anybody have a really bad history with anybody? Aggression. So what would be aggression? What part of aggression would aggression's a feeling or?
Oh, well, I said a grudge.
A grudge. Oh, a grudge. A grudge. Yeah, a grudge. What else might be? One or two more things. What could be down here that are important? If you're really, if people were killing each other in some place for years, I mean, what? Hatred. Yeah. And that's usually based on what? I mean, what are these things based on? What?
Normally blind hatred.
Let's be blind, or maybe for identity. But what? You mean more of the feelings? What kind of things? I mean, why am I? Might be a way to. Huh?
They're like part of the group, like ethnicity, culture, that kind.
Well, yeah, let's see, right? Culture, ethnicity, all these things are under here. I was thinking about if people have been attacking me, how am I likely to feel about them? Defensive. Yeah, I was thinking afraid, but yeah, defensive. Fear. Yeah, was there a hand up?
I was just going to say fear.
Fear, thank you. I felt it. Okay, sorry. Fear. So there are all these just emotions, and these things can happen under the surface. Okay. And you think you're trying to make an agreement, but you can. Okay, so the other thing, we'll come back to this later, is then how about the style of your, I want you to just think about this now, but I'll show you some things and we'll come back and let you work on it a little bit. But how many people would say, let's just give you one more term, that you're, if let's say bargaining. How many people, what do you think I mean by saying someone's a hard bargainer in a negotiation? What? Other people, what do you think I mean by it there?
Stubborn.
Stubborn. Yeah.
Difficult to deal with.
What?
Difficult to deal with or negotiate.
Maybe difficult to deal with because they just want to what? Win. They want to win, right. And what would now a soft bargainer mean? What do you think that implies to you? Maybe you heard it, yeah.
Willing to compromise?
Willing or maybe too willing? A pushover. I think that's the fear, is that people think, well, I don't want to be seen as soft, so I have to be tough and be hard. And so these guys who really popularized conflict resolution, Fisher and Urey, you might read them, Fisher and Urey, who wrote a book called Getting to Yes, if you care. They said, well, there's something in between, and they called it principled bargaining. And then they had some principles of it, like be hard on the problem, not the people, proceed independent of trust, focus on interests. They sometimes use this word instead of needs, but interests. So you know that. Okay. All right, so that now they define. How many people thought your person you were negotiating with was a hard bargainer? How many people thought you were dealing with a hard bargainer? Tough, wanted to win, no compromise. Only her. Okay, we'll hire her to be our negotiator. How many people thought they were soft, they were too nice, they were giving away? Few? Thought you were, yeah, too nice maybe. How many people thought there was something in between? Trying to figure something out, communicating. Okay, we'll talk later a little more about, we'll slice this out a little more about styles of dealing with conflict because it's fun. But let's just think about a little bit, though, about what do we do in response, and then you'll think about your style, because so these are sort of the same things we had before, but how do we change them? Okay, I'll just get into these. So this is a funny idea. We were just negotiating for some stuff. But how can you negotiate identity? Or can you? I don't know. Is my identity negotiable? I don't know. What do you think about that? How many people think you could negotiate your identity? I don't have the answer to this. How many think you could negotiate your identity? And you want to say anything what you think, what that means?
A lot of people who are native or born in America don't necessarily think themselves American. They'll think themselves their own heritage. So they go, I'm French Canadian, I'm German.
Huh. So it can shift in a way. It can evolve your sense of who you are. Great. Yeah.
I feel like as you grow older, your identity and your perspective upon your own identity changes as well, which can cause a shift in your identity.
So it can shift. Yeah, it can shift. Yeah.
Like other people's views that you meet throughout that time can like almost contradict how you feel, and that causes you to negotiate your own identity and how you feel.
Really good answers. Yeah. I mean, we have had when people come from Cyprus say, well, they used to call themselves Greeks and Turks. And then after independence, they call themselves Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. And sometimes when we get themselves together, inevitably somebody will say, well, we're all Cypriots. Why don't we just stop saying Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots? We're all Cypriots. They don't all agree, but it's a different way of thinking about who they are. These are actually people from Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is a whole other story in the Caucasus, had a war. At the end of the Soviet Union, they were Soviet republics and they had a war with each other. This is actually in Uganda, but I won't get into that model. But in terms of dealing with these relationships, dialogue is a big tool for doing it. And maybe we'll spend a little time on that, giving you some skills for dialogue. This idea of reconciliation, that's a Greek Cypriot. Tell me, can you tell which one's the Greek Cypriot and which one's the Turkish Cypriot? I don't think so. One on the left is Turkish. How'd you know? Just good guess. Wait, whoops. Wait a minute, is he right? No, actually, wait a minute. You said he's Turkish and he's Greek? No, it's the opposite. Yeah, definitely. Anyway, and this is the guy who's a real pacifist from Vermont, and he's meeting the soldiers. I had to take that picture. We won't really go into that, but political representation and but it's about people's needs, that they feel represented as a minority. But We won't spend that much time. These are the Cypriots. They painted a world map together as something to create something common. They did it in Brattleboro in the youth center there. This is in Nicaragua. And here they kept the prisons where the dictator used to keep the prisoners. And then when the dictator was overthrown, they knocked down his statue to him. And it's just sort of ruined there to remind them. And this is another memorial to that. They covered this tank and their guns sticking out of the wall over here, covered it in concrete to remember the war in Nicaragua. And these are, actually, it's a child labor project we're doing with teenagers from Brattleboro going down to work with kids in Nicaragua. I thought this was a great one. Look at this. I was in Uganda right after Obama got elected, and his dad is from northern Kenya, and it's the same tribe as northern Uganda, the Luo, which is his father's language. And they were so excited. So look at that. Originally born in Africa to manage Americans. I love it. Peace. And this is a nice one. We talk. I mean, gender. You can do a whole class about gender relationships, but a lot of violence is connected to masculinity. And in Africa, there's a few nice T-shirts I've seen about this. What does it mean to be a man, as opposed to being tough and being dominant? It's a nice image. Some other, just recreating visions. And these are Iraqi and American kids at a program. Trying to, and there were some nice. And this is a nice. I want to tell you about this activity because these are kids from Cyprus. And remember how I said it was the invasion versus the happy peace operation? So they live on the same island, but they have really two histories that are completely different. And we'll do a little ritual sort of where they stand outside and be quiet and then come in and silently, because they've prepared, what are the important dates in their history? And then they read the two views. And I can guarantee you this time here is between 1963, when the fighting really took off between the Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and 74, when the invasion was. Greek Cypriots don't study that at all because they were committing a lot of atrocities against the Turkish Cypriots. So the Turkish Cypriots remember all of them. And they say, I don't know what happened between those years. We never talk about it in school. So then they look at those, and then they sit down in a circle. You can see people are sitting in a circle, and they'll ask each other, well, how did you learn that? How did you learn this? And try to get them not to debate, but to have a dialogue. Let's do a minute to think about the difference between debate and dialogue to communicate ideas. I just have you do a little exercise. So people sitting next to a partner, think about how you communicate ideas. So what you're going to do with one hand is make a very beautiful sculpture with your one hand, okay? And at the same time, with your partner, you're going to be attacking their sculpture. And don't break anyone's fingers. I mean, be careful. This is slightly dangerous, but you can handle it. So, and just feel what that's like as a way of communicating ideas and whether you can develop your ideas. So just take a minute, get a person next to you. You can do it with 3 people. It's a little harder, but you can do it. And just do that for a minute. We'll do a couple of these. Okay, I think you're getting it. Don't hurt anybody. Okay. Okay, so what kind of communication of this? How would you shout out some words? What are some communication of ideas for this? What kind of discourse? What kind of?
Wait, are we talking?
What would you call it? If this is a symbol for talking, what are you doing? Fighting. Yeah. What else? Other words? Interrupting. Aggressing. Combative. Okay, was it a good way to communicate your ideas and develop them?
It's distracting.
Maybe it's distracting. Yeah, it's distracting because what? What are you concentrating on? It's hard, yeah. This was like this. It's hard, 2 at a time. Okay, but now let's just think about, if you're just having a discussion, let's think about it. You make one beautiful sculpture, and first, because this happens in class a lot, just peek to make sure yours is better. than the other person. Don't let them catch you looking. Make your beautiful sculpture and just kind of peek to see that all you really care about is that yours is better, right? But just kind of peek and see what that feels like. Does that remind you of class sometimes? What? How? Or no? What kind of communication is that? What are people trying to do? What? Sneaky, but size up people. Sometimes maybe in class people just want to have the best idea and they don't really care what other people are saying. Is that true or not in New Hampshire? Okay, only in Vermont. Now go ahead and make your beautiful sculpture and look at it. Appreciate each other's and see how that feels, and is that a better way of communicating? And talk to each other for a minute and say, how's that different from the other two? Just for a few seconds, and then talk to each other. Is that different? Is it better? Is it boring? I don't know. Compare it. Make a beautiful sculpture and appreciate. Just share. So you can share. Try it. You have to try it to know what it's like. You can't just be abstract. Okay, was that better? I mean, really? How is that different? Shout out if you have a few things. How is that different? Was different? Was it a better way of communicating? But it was sort of just like going around and looking at nice houses or gardens. Now what I want you to see, if we're going to, that's sort of a discussion in class and examining different ideas. It's kind of what we're doing today. Now what happens if you try to make a 4-hand or 6-hand sculpture together? See what happens to your communication and development of ideas in that. Try that. Combination. 6 hands. If you don't do it, you'll never know what it's like. Don't be afraid. You can let him in too. Let him in too. He can join in. Yeah, all 3 of you. Let's see. Ooh. There's some very nice ones here. Okay.
I was just wondering if we want to try and think about maybe like 5-minute question, like at 1:55 to just open it.
Okay, is that clock right? Okay. 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 How was that different? How was that different in terms of developing ideas? What kind of ideas? If we called that a dialogue, how would we maybe? Yeah.
Ideas merged instead of just remaining like your idea and my idea. It became like our ideas.
That's really well said. It became our idea instead of my idea and your idea that we have to defend it, even if we know it's wrong after a while. And it can be more complex. And when we have these problems we're dealing with, we don't have just one answer from our perspective. We need to have a more complex approach to those things. Okay, so I'm just going to flip through the last few of these. You get the idea. Here's a wonderful image of interfaith understanding. We made these cakes. They were actually from sort of old recipes from Spain, when the people, Jews and Christians and Muslims lived together in Spain and did pretty well. These kids are from Iraq. Some creative things have people heard of Kosovo and Serbia, the conflict between them that's going on now? In the border town, Mitrovica, they have a school of rock where they bring kids from both sides of the river, where the Serbs are in the north and the Kosovar Albanians are in the south. They go and they study rock and roll music. And then in the summer, they have to go to Macedonia because it's not safe to have a big rock concert. But I thought it's a really creative approach to solving the relationships. So, rituals, symbols, trying to see each other in different ways. And then finally being able to have some vision to work for change. These are the Armenians and Azerbaijanis designing projects together. And I think it's really important using music. And there's this idea of developing peace culture. What does peace culture mean? To really, as we said, changing identity, but changing our patterns, our rhythms of being together. And food, I think, is really important. We always have, when people come in the summer, they cook their food. And I had Israelis and Palestinians cooking in my kitchen together a few weeks ago, adults. And we had Afghans and Pakistanis, Pashtuns. That's all the Taliban land there. They were cooking. This is Venezuela, and these are Iraqi women cooking. And then this is a great picture because this one is in Uganda. And this is a great guy named Hakim, who's a hip-hop artist in Uganda. And I just think he and I are from such different worlds, and yet we've kind of became close. But I just thought that picture just showed how far apart we are. The first thing I met him, he was sitting up on the top of a slide on a ladder, and I didn't know who he was, and he just started rapping, at me, pretty much rapping. It's like, okay, but and he's done a lot of great community organizing with that rap music, and we even had him Skyping with teenagers here, doing some rap by Skype from Uganda recently. And really, to transform these relationships, ultimately, how do we get to the place where people feel like they're together, where there's an inclusive circle? And that's about it. And what does it mean, sort of envisioning peace? Can you read what they wrote there? Yeah, peace. So we're, we come out very inspired from these youth programs because people have really transformed their relationships and see some hope, but of course they go home and things don't change, and it's hard to keep the hope alive in the reality of those situations. So I want to take a few questions, and then maybe I'll have you do one more activity together to finish. Any questions? Yeah.
When you go to other countries and work with kids or adults, like what is your contact there in terms of like who you reach out to in the community?
Well, there have to be some local organizations or something that you're connected with. I mean, usually people are sending students to us here. Occasionally we go out there. When I lived in Cyprus, I was a Fulbright scholar, so I was there for 9 months and doing conflict. They called it conflict resolution, and I'd travel back and forth. I was the only one really who could go easily. I mean, the United Nations could go, but it was nice. So different contexts like that. But then a lot of these are programs that are sponsored by our government, like the kids from Libya and Burma and Tunisia. They want to bring them here and do some training for them. So we compete to win those grants, like we used to do it with Amid East, and then they come here, and then the embassy will select the kids, or some local partner will, and it can be very competitive. It's a free trip to the United States. People really want to do it, and of course they're fantastic students to come. And if you guys, I don't know, I mean, you might get older, sometimes students apply to work in these programs, and you could do that too, yeah.
During your travels, did you find that your identity transformed in some way?
Mine?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean, I personally think I take on a lot of these parts. I mean, is it really my identity? But do I feel close to Cyprus? I feel, I pick up these pieces. I mean, if I was in parts of the world, I'll pick up the accent, and my identity is not so strong. But I'm originally from California, so we're not sure who we are out there anyway. But that's a great question. I mean, I'll really think about that. How much can I say it's mine? Some people say, no, we have power and we can't appropriate somebody else's culture, that they don't have power. But I'm not sure I share that political view. I think we really do broaden our sense of who we are. I mean, can we be a global citizen? But every time I find places I've never heard of and really complicated conflicts. We had a student from Northeast India. There's all these groups in Northeast India. I bet you don't even know what Northeast India is. I bet you do.
I do.
You do? Are you from there?
From West India.
You're from West India. But no, people on the other side of Bangladesh, people don't even know it's there. All these independence movements, all this violence, and we never, most of us have never even heard of it. So there's so many places. But eating the food definitely helps. Maybe if you come over, we're going to have a South Asian night at my house. There are a bunch of Indian, Nepali, Pakistani students.
I'm down for that.
So if you want to come over, you're invited. You tell Greg you can come over. I'll let you know. Any other questions? Okay, I'll stay here for a few minutes. Yeah?
I wanted to ask, there are a bunch of terms that sort of are around in this field, peacekeeping, peacemaking, peacebuilding, and I was wondering if you could maybe clarify those words.
Yeah, I didn't really, there's so much to cover, but I didn't really do a definition of that. But peacebuilding, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and what's the difference? Sounds kind of the same. But actually, one of the Secretary Generals of the United Nations about 20 years ago actually wrote a book sort of defining the difference. The UN does peacekeeping and peacemaking and peacebuilding. So that's the easiest way to think about it. What do you think peacekeeping is? Who does peacekeeping from the UN? Anybody know? It's, ever see the picture of the guys with the blue helmets? The blue helmets, the peacekeepers. And they basically are invited in after a ceasefire to stay between the two sides and sort of enforce the peace. They're not supposed to shoot except to defend themselves. That's who's in Cyprus, the British soldiers between the two, and other countries, some. So that's a peacekeeping, just kind of monitoring, keeping the tension down, pushing people back. Like in Cyprus, they would have, at some point, the green line was 8 meters apart, and the guys would joust with bayonets, just kind of for fun. So they negotiated a way to move that back so it would reduce tensions. That's sort of peacekeeping. Peacemaking would be diplomacy and making agreements, what John Kerry's trying to do now. And then peacebuilding is broader. It's creative. Anything you can think of to do to change relationships, do dialogue, do education, do art, all kinds of things to change the systems. Okay? All right, we just have a couple minutes, so I just want you guys to talk to each other for the last few minutes. Because we talk about dialogue as a tool here, and I'll just very quickly say, what are the two parts of dialogue? Very simple. Talking and listening. And we don't really have time to train you too much in talking and listening, but I think you know what, we talk about active listening. Anybody learn about active listening in school? Yeah. So active listening, I'll just tell you now because we don't have time to really tease it out. But the purpose from my point of view is to let somebody know you're listening to them. Because how do you feel when somebody's listening to you? How do you feel when somebody's not listening to you?
Annoyed.
Yeah. Bad, annoyed, even disrespected. Okay, so how do you let people know you're listening to them?
Eye contact.
What? Body language. Everybody show me good, I should have done this in the beginning. Show me good body language for listening. You all know what it is. Oh, you're moving an awful lot. Okay, show me bad body language for listening. Yeah, good. We're almost done, don't worry. Okay. Right. You could also use words. What kind of things would you do to use words? You could ask questions. What kind of questions? Clarifying questions. What do you mean? And to really let them know you heard, you would do what? 100%. How can I really for sure let you know I'm not faking you? Repeat. Summarize, paraphrase. Okay, good. And now for speaking, the one thing I want to tell you, in conflict, we try to get people to use I statements. Usually, if somebody says I a lot, it's kind of annoying, right? I. But if you say you a lot in a conflict, you, what can they think?
Accusing.
Yeah, attacking, blaming. And if I say we think this, what can go wrong? Speaking for somebody else. We Americans think this. Well, I can't really say that. I can say we Vermonters, and I can be accurate. But okay, so what I want you guys to do is just get a person talk to you, and just take turns. Each for like 2 minutes each. One person, and maybe tell a story about who listens to you, who doesn't listen to you in your life, and how do you know they're listening to you? I mean, it's just sort of arbitrary what to talk about, but just tell some story, and the other person really actively listen for 2 minutes, and then we'll switch, and then, or if you want to say something else, if you want to talk about my class that's transforming me the most right now, that's fine too, or where I want to go study abroad. But the point is, I want you really just to experience really focusing on each other for a couple minutes, listening, and so pick one of those topics, and doesn't matter what, and each, I'll tell you in 2 minutes, and we'll switch, and then we'll wrap up.
Said that.
Okay, please finish. I'll stay here for a minute. If you have questions, first of all, how many people thought your partner was listening to you? How'd you know?
Because he was repeating everything we said.
Oh, okay, good. Was it annoying? How did it make you feel? Okay, so I hope you'll listen to each other and travel abroad and Transforms from conflicts. Oh, thank you.